I want to thank our audience for joining us for today's sixth session of 20 for 20 in 2020, which is a segment I've started that will enable people to get to meet professionals who will help them make the important decisions in their lives. This will include accountants, attorneys, financial advisors, and more. And I will be asking them 20 questions, and I will be interviewing 20 people, and I hope to get this all done before the end of 2020. So I'm so glad you could join us today. I'll introduce myself first. I'm Ella Newman, and I'm with the Norton Advisory Group. I'm a trusted insurance advisor that creates selective strategies that will help you again, meet the important decisions you're making in terms of estate planning, business succession planning, retirement, and long-term care and other insurance concerns that you may have. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming Bob Charron, who's a CPA and the partner in charge of the tax department for Friedman LLP. And I met Bob a number of years ago at a networking event when he had recently moved to New York City from Boston, and he was with a prestigious firm then, and then since then has moved to Friedman. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you our questions. Are you ready to get started?
I sure am. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Ella.
I'm thrilled to have you, especially after you've just gone through a horrendous tax season, which I know came to a sort of end on October 15th. And I think you took a breath of fresh air, but I know you were working so hard. It must have been quite the challenge. And I'm sure you're happy to have that date behind you.
Most definitely.
Okay. All right. So we'll get started. So we'll start with, what is the primary focus of your practice?
I concentrate, Ella, on dealing with high net worth individuals. I run the tax department at Friedman. Friedman is a large national accounting firm, top 40 in the country, and we have about 200 people in our tax department. But I also have a client practice in addition to my administrative duties running the tax practice. And my concentration is high net worth individuals.
That's great. Well, what led you to this career? And then once you decided on it, what are some of the credentials you had to get? But tell us first how you got into this career in the first place.
Well, my dad, Ella, was a CPA with a successful practice. And that's how I got into it. I knew from when I was 11 years old, I wanted to be an accountant.
That's great.
Currently, I'm a CPA. I graduated at Boston University. I was magna cum laude. The only other credential really is that I had the bronze medal for the third highest marks on the CPA exam in Massachusetts when I took 600 other people.
That's pretty impressive. That's good. How did you get to work at this particular firm?
Well, it's interesting. I was working for another competing firm here in New York City, a large national firm. And on April 14th, 2011, I received a call from a recruiter. And I indicated I had no interest in leaving. I said, unless you're calling about Friedman, who I'd heard a lot of good things about. And he said, well, that's exactly who I was calling for. It was Friedman, and they're looking for someone to run their tax department. At that time, I was, for the last 10 or 15 years, had been more of a managerial role, not a tax role. I formerly was a tax accountant, but I had been managing partner of a firm, and I had been running the New York City office of this large national accounting firm. And I indicated that I at that time, didn't even do my own tax return, let alone could run a tax department. They said, well, they want to interview you. And meanwhile, I went for a couple of interviews and kind of fell in love with the firm. And that's why I'm at Friedman now.
That's great. Okay, Bob. Bob, what would you say are some of the highlights of your career experience?
Well, as I just mentioned, being the managing partner of the largest CPA firm in New England, after the Big Four, there was the Big Four, and then my firm was number 5, and I was managing partner for several years. I would say that was probably one of the highlights. Winning the bronze medal in the CPA exam would be another one. I've had a number of cases, deals, negotiations, putting clients together, mergers, IRS audit. I had one IRS audit that was written up in Fortune magazine as it was groundbreaking, and we had a successful result for our client. I've been on Fox TV here in New York City. I've been on a national coast-to-coast radio show 5 times, talking about estate planning and about tax planning in general. So I would say that would be some of the things that I think about as being highlights.
Well, they certainly do sound like highlights. What type of clients do you tend to work with primarily?
High net worth individuals. And if you have a definition for high net worth, it would be great, because I don't. I just know it. You know it when you see it.
I hear you. Are they in any particular field or industry, or any particular concentration?
If I were to look, they're all over the place, but if I were to look at one particular niche, it'd be real estate.
Okay. And what are some of the problems and issues you help your clients address?
Income tax planning, estate tax planning, and just general business consulting.
And in terms of your approach, would you say that you're more conservative or aggressive as an accountant?
Well, I would say neither. I would say there are black areas, there are white areas, and there are gray areas. If it's black and white, then there's no decision. It's in the gray areas that I tend to always try to be in favor of the client's approach.
Okay.
What was best for the client.
Well, that sounds reasonable. At least you're working with your client to figure out what's right for them. What is your experience in dealing with the IRS?
As I mentioned before, I've had many, many audits. I honestly cannot remember ever having a negative result in any of the audits that I've been associated with. So it's been very, very good.
So you've had a lot of experience in the audit space.
Yes.
As you've said. And how do you deal with a client that has multiple entities in some of these businesses these days? Clients have so much going on.
Well, the key is that a professional advisor cannot operate in a vacuum. And if I'm dealing with a client with multiple entities, I need to either have control or have total knowledge of all the entities going on, so that I don't run into a situation where one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing.
Right. That makes sense. Now, do you provide, when you're working with a client, do you provide formal updates, reviews, and maintenance programs? How do you work that with your clients?
I do for my larger clients, because as we know, time is money, and you don't want to spend a lot of hours on a client that doesn't really have the needs for it. Larger clients, business operations, are very, very high net worth people. They do, and we generally will meet quarterly.
You meet quarterly in those cases,
Right.
That makes sense. What is it like to work with you initially when you meet a new client, and then what is it like when you have a long-term relationship?
Well, I think the 2 points that stand out are, I pride myself on being very responsive. I think you know that from personal experience, for when we have dealt together for a number of years. I believe in the 24-hour rule and getting back within 24 hours to a client or a business associate, hopefully a lot sooner than that. The other tenet that I ascribe to is I try to care more about clients' problems than they do themselves.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful characteristic. That's great. And how do you determine the fees, and what do you include in some of these engagements?
Well, as in most professional services, we bill on an hourly basis. Our time is based on the number of hours spent. I try to pass the work down wherever possible to people with lower billing rates who work for me. We outsource a lot of data processing and data input and clerical functions to outside firms that charge very, very reasonable rates so we can keep the client's fees down. Eventually, when I have experience with a client after a couple of years, then we can talk about setting up just a fixed fee and basing it that way. But when you don't have experience, you don't know what kind of problems they're going to have and how long they're going to take. So it's generally on an hourly basis.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I can see that. Okay. Bob, what are some of the experiences you've had in mitigating or dealing with estate taxes and other taxes?
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I just finished last week a big IRS audit with a client in Massachusetts. A lot of issues, a lot of artwork, famous art works that were involved, a lot of real estate that was involved. And it was an audit, and we ended that audit with absolutely no change. As a matter of fact, a small refund for the client. So that was a recent experience. Another experience I had a number of years ago in Massachusetts was I had a client who owned an automobile dealership who was 74 years old, and he called me on March 9th and asked, I say March 9th because that was my birthday. He called me on March 9th and told me that he had a girlfriend who was 34 years old and that he wanted to give her a lot of money, but he didn't want to pay any gift taxes. And he asked me for my professional opinion as to what could be done. So tongue in cheek and somewhat jokingly, I said, well, you could marry her and then take advantage of the marital deduction and there'd be no taxes. And he thanked me very much. And the next week he married her.
That's
and
a good
passed away very shortly thereafter. And his 5 children sued the estate for being disinherited. And that was settled out of court. So that was an unusual experience that you just can't make up. The other one that stands out in my mind is I had a client with a $100 million estate, and that, do you recall there was a period of time, I believe around 2008, where there was 1 year there was no estate tax?
Yes, I remember that.
And this client died on January 1st, the day after that 1 year hiatus in estate taxes. And it cost his heirs $50 million. Of course, he didn't have insurance or anything else. And so if they had pulled the plug one day earlier, and he was 90 years old, they would have saved $50 million. So that was kind of an unusual, unfortunate situation.
Steinbrenner passed away that year.
That's who I always think about, right?
Exactly. Yes, I remember that. That was a big factor. Let's see. So how often do you communicate with your clients about tax issues?
Well, other than the quarterly meetings, which I mentioned before for some of my larger clients, I read every morning. I read tax journals, tax notes, tax, whatever comes out in the literature. And I spend a good deal of time every morning when I get up reading that. If I see something of an article that affects one of my clients, I immediately will email them, or I'll send them a copy of the article and say we ought to talk about this. So it's a constant communication.
Well, that's really good. I think that's very important. So what are some other services you provide or issues that you tend to address with your clients?
It's more the firm than me, but we do valuation work. We do forensic work. As you know, valuation, very important for estate planning. We have a digital currency practice. We have a group called Cizen, which is for technology, for keeping people safe from hackers, which we have for our clients. An international tax department of 15 people, who just specialize in international issues because that's become so prominent, state and local tax practice. That's pretty much it, plus traditional, of course, accounting services, audit, bookkeeping, tax, and planning.
Sure. Okay. Now, what are your tax philosophy and tax planning priorities? And will these maximize tax savings?
Well, I have two basic philosophies, and one is don't let the tax tail wag the dog. In other words, there's more to life than just avoiding the taxes. You know, if that's the case, I wouldn't be living in New York City in the heart of Manhattan. In the second largest state tax, I'd be living in Florida or Arizona or someplace like that. And the second one is pay no tax before it's time.
I like that. Good saying. I think that's great. What can your clients do to help you with the work you're doing for them to keep the fees down?
Real simple, Ella. Give me all the facts. So many times you just get half the facts or part of the story or what clients want you to hear, you know, and it ends up just in waste motion and more time than needs to be spent.
Okay, that makes sense. What types of creative tax and business planning advice do you offer?
Well, right now, the hot items for planning advice are maximizing discounts, you know, especially with regard to estate planning, doing gifting during your lifetime and taking advantage of these new, the high level of credits that may not be available after November 3rd. Not literally November 3rd, but maybe 2022, depending on what happens. And using insurance, life insurance trusts, very important, using intentionally defective grantor trusts. And from an income tax point of view, I hate to say it because I love New York, but a lot of people are leaving New York to go to states that don't have income taxes because not only are the taxes so high now, but they're probably going to get higher.
Yeah, especially with all the stress from this COVID and pandemic issues impacting all these states. Absolutely. Now, who in your office would discuss your clients' issues if you were not available?
Well, our firm philosophy is to have 3 people on every client. So there would be myself, there would be another senior person, and another associate who would be on. So every client is well covered.
So that's important. That's good. And last but not least, what can you tell us about yourself that we wouldn't find out on the internet?
Well, I guess that's a great question. Before the pandemic, I was into boxing, and I would do that on a regular basis. And I like to collect old and new fountain pens. I have an extensive fountain pen collection. So other than that, I guess just whatever normal is, I'm just a normal guy.
Oh, that's great. I actually had a client who collected fountain pens also, and I believe I remember he kept them in cigar boxes.
Well, I have a little more formal structure, but I can appreciate that.
Fancy ones. Right, exactly. Well, this was outstanding. Thank you so much, Bob, for telling us about your firm, your practice, your clients, etc. Now, let my audience know what is the best way to get in touch with you.
Well, during these times, which are different, I'm never in my office anymore. My office is, you see it now, my home.
Right.
But my email at rcharron, CHARRON, at Friedman, FRIEDMANLLP.com would be good, or my office number, which I've rigged so it works in my home, is 212-842-7627.
That's terrific. And so what I'm going to do is encourage everybody to look at our websites, look at your Friedman website and my Norton Advisory Group.com website as well to be able to look up our backgrounds in more detail about us and our firms. And I do want to point out that now, as you've said in some of the comments you made, that this is a very important time to take a look at planning things that are going to be important for you relating to insurance as well as anything else. Because of the low interest rate environment and because of the changes in the economy that are impacting insurance carriers and companies and underwriters, there's going to be a lot of changes taking place. So if an individual has not reviewed their insurance in a while, it is really important that they take a look at that. And if they were considering using insurance for some planning, the sooner they take action before the end of the year, the better off they will be because of these changes that are coming down currently. So what I'm offering is if anyone wants to get a free complimentary review of their insurance portfolio, they can reach me at ella@nortonadvisorygroup.com, and I'm going to offer a virtual appointment with them, and we can do that kind of work with them. So that's really important. And I'm glad you were able to participate in our program. And I'm hoping that our audience will come back for my next 20 for 20 in 2020. And somehow I'm pursuing all these before the year end. And in the meantime, I want you and everybody to stay healthy and not to forget to vote. And, and thank you so much for joining me today.